Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Many Faces of Cancer podcast. I am your host, Melissa Grosboll, and joining me today is Diane Simard. And Diane is recognized as one of the inaugural Top 100 National Women in Business to Watch by businesswomen.com. She is a business leader strategist, a survivor of stage 3 breast cancer, a motivational speaker, a blogger, and psycho-oncology advocate to bring more attention to the psychological trauma cancer often creates. Within 3 months of completing treatment, Diane founded the Center for Oncology Psychology Excellence, or COPE, at the University of Denver and began writing the multi-award winning book, The Unlikely Gift of Breast Cancer, named one of Book Authority's best breast cancer books of all time. Her second book, titled Heal Forward, Transform Emotional Scars into Impact, received a 5-star rating. And her next book, a sequel to The Unlikely Gift, will release next year. So welcome to the show, Diane.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
I'm so excited to chat with you. We have got so much to unpack with that great bio. And again, thanks for sending me that. I don't always get them from people, so I love when I actually have something to read instead of making things up on the fly.
I understand.
All right, so let's get started. So you are just about 10 years out from stage 3 breast cancer. So let's kind of start. Just tell us a little bit about where you were in life. How did the diagnosis come about? And your basic treatment for all of that.
Certainly. So I was 49 and a half when I was diagnosed. And key to my story is the fact that I had had a benign something in my left breast 10 years before. And so I had had annual mammograms since the age of 40 and had been faithful about that. And so when I was 49 and a half, I was at this mindset that when I turned 50, everything was just going to start to go right. And I had all these expectations. I was going to forgive myself and be at peace and just stopped being so hard on myself. And so when I went for my annual mammogram in February of that year, it was just business as usual. And in fact, I didn't hear back for a week. And my husband actually was becoming concerned that I hadn't heard back. And so when I did, they called me back for follow-on tests, so a diagnostic mammogram and then ultrasound. And so it was during my ultrasound when the technician accidentally let it slip because we were becoming pals quickly, that it didn't look good. And so I started to freak out already, and then the radiologist came in and said he didn't need to do anything. He said you need to have a biopsy, and I just knew. I knew I have this crazy sixth sense, and so things accelerated very quickly because, as it turned out, I had likely had breast cancer for several years. I had been doing what they told me to do, but I have that darn dense breast tissue, and
They
so
didn't see it in previous mammograms?
no, they did not.
Wow.
And so this isn't right to say it this way, but luckily for me, actually, I had 2 breast tumors that were close enough together that they started to look like something was clustering. And that's what tipped them off, thankfully, that year. And so I ended up having 3 tumors all in my left breast, but it had already traveled to my armpit, to the lymph nodes in my armpit. The largest of those 3 tumors was less than 2 centimeters. And so I had a non-aggressive grade of cancer that was behaving aggressively. And so I did not fit the parameters of staging. And so that whole being an anomaly became a theme for me. I'm just always the one that just, well, she doesn't fit the parameters. You're so different. You do things so differently. And I had a second opinion on this, and I was staged as a stage 3C because everyone felt that I should have the full-on nuclear bomb treatment and
Really?
throw everything at me because they knew that there was cancer in one of my 6 or 7 lymph nodes in that cluster of lymph nodes in my left armpit, but they were afraid to biopsy any more than that for fear of basically unleashing cancer throughout my body.
Right.
And so, I mean, you could say we caught it just in time. I don't know. You never know with these things. But with that, then I started with 16 rounds of chemotherapy within a short amount of time.
Wow.
And so 5 months of that. And then I had lumpectomy surgery because those tumors were so small. I did not have to have a mastectomy. It was an option, but it was not going to impact the chance of recurrence. And so,
Were the
I,
tumors all three of them really close together?
not really. Well, those two were, thankfully,
Okay.
which is weird. And then I had one on my chest wall, and that
Oh.
little rascal caused us all kinds of problems, especially when it came then to radiation, which was the last part. And they were radiating right next to my heart, and
Hmm.
so I had to hold my breath every time they were radiating me, and I got severely burned. And I was so naive. I just assumed that they would go in and radiate at the former tumor site, right? Because I had already had the tumors out by then. And no, they radiated this whole quadrant. And so, uh, left upper quarter of my body. So, lymph nodes near my neck bone got fried, and that bled. And anyway, it was it was quite a extensive 10 months of treatment. And I know so many have been through this. So I'm not unique, but I was just exhausted. But
I
it
bet.
real it really was like nothing I'd ever been through, and I was so freaked out by chemo. And it wasn't about losing my hair. I actually chose to lose my hair. That was my decision because in 2015, cold cap therapy was still so new in this country. With me being a very data driven person, because I worked around engineers my whole life, I was not comfortable with the fact that they didn't have any data yet in this country that showed whether or not cancer could still hang out in your scalp. It's changed since then. And I applied any, whatever decision you make, that's your decision. But um, and actually losing my hair was very therapeutic and a really important part of my sort of recreating and self discovering who I really am. And once it was all finished. So,
Oh, tell me a little bit more about
yeah.
rediscovering who you
Yeah.
are.
Thank you. Well, I had this expectation because of my age that, man, could we just one thing go right for once? And so I had just this very negative attitude of why me, why me? And that stayed with me as I started on treatment. And um, having grown up in a very small town in Nebraska, my family, we fortunately had a lot of I shouldn't say this all this way either. This is coming out wrong too, but we had a lot of heart disease and dementia, but not cancer in our family. And so didn't have much experience with it. And so I just thought, wow, what have I done wrong in my life to be cursed with this? And I was very bitter and angry. And it really wasn't until I got into chemo pretty far. I ended up in the emergency room with a bad bout of vertigo that was not triggered by chemo. However, I was so sick. So I have a weak stomach and had such bad nausea. I had a dear friend perform some acupuncture treatments. And Melissa, you can probably relate to that. I thought, oh, this can do no damage.
Right.
And and so it actually was working pretty well because I was just sick. I was just nauseous all the time, and I hate feeling sick. And so I would find relief, but then after the second or third treatment, I started to have these energy jolts just shooting through my body, especially my head. And we had a really wet spring in 2015 when I was going through chemo, and so my allergies were particularly bad. And so one night I rolled over in bed and I unleashed that inner ear crystal, and it just went. I launched into the worst bout of vertigo I hope I ever have to go through, and I couldn't even. I was laying still in bed and I was throwing up. I mean, it was horrible.
Wow.
Took an hour for my husband to, and I didn't want him to, because it's 3:30 in the morning, and I didn't want the neighbors to freak out because everybody thought I had one foot in the grave already, and so he drove me to the ER, and actually they did a brain scan and found no, it was just you had a really whopper bout of vertigo. And so on top of everything, now I couldn't wear high heels. I couldn't drive. I couldn't change lanes because I was afraid to move my head because I was so freaked out and was having a vertigo flashback constantly. And I still have cancer. So, I mean, I serve it up well. When I do it up, I seem to really pour it on quite thick. So I
Did
was
you ever have
ready.
another bout after that, or was just
Thank God I
one?
did not. I have
Okay,
not,
good.
but I do carry. It's just over the counter anti nausea medicine with me for peace of mind. But it was just a perfect storm, and doing
Have you
something
ever
is
gotten acupuncture again?
no, and I and it really I wouldn't be afraid to, but it just it's just, I'm that person, right?
Right.
Okay, if something's going to go wrong, it's going to happen to me. And so I don't mean to make light of this and laugh about it now, but I have to tell you, that's the place I'm honestly at, is like, how? That's just the story of my life. And this kind of segues back into your rediscovery question. I started to have these epiphanies of, wow. For example, I was so uh, near the end of the first part of the chemo, which is the adriamycin and cytoxin. I was just so freaked out and falling into depression and major anxiety. So I asked my medical oncologist for a referral to a counselor, a therapist who understood what it was like to work with a type A business person like me that wants to believe she's rocking cancer and she really isn't. And she's like, well, I don't know of anybody. I know they exist. And I go, you mean to tell me you don't know anyone that could help someone like me? She goes, well, I know they exist. I just don't know of any names of anybody who specifically works with mental health and cancer. And I'm like, wow, that is just not right. And so, but she said, be sure to check out our breast cancer support group. And I said, something awful. And I said, making a quilt block is not going to make me feel better. And it was a horrible thing to say, but that's where my mind was at. I was so frustrated. So I said, I can do something with this. And so I had some connections at the University of Denver from a previous life. And I just started doing what I do because I was trained as a journalist. So I always joke that I went all Geraldo on this whole mental health thing. And I did. And I was still going through treatment. Thank God, finally, after chemo was finished, I had my first meeting at the University of Denver and with what would be their clinical psychology department. And again, these are psychologists that actually work with clients and do some research. And I told them, I'm like, I'm really frustrated by the lack of it's like a workforce development issue, quite honestly, that we haven't provided this kind of training. And the dean of the school said, yeah, it's an up and coming field called behavioral health. And we really need to provide more training so that our clients who are dealing with any health issues, not just cancer, granted, now cancer is a major trauma because of the fear of mortality. But she said, so we'd like to do something with behavioral health. I said, no, I'm going through cancer. I know plenty of people that are as traumatized as I am. We need to get these psychologists trained in how to work with cancer patients and just what is so unique about the cancer experience as it differs from, say, heart disease or diabetes and so we did it. And honestly, it was doing something about that, to be planting seeds, to be initiating that, and then handing me a megaphone and to say, I believe the state of our mental health has so much to do with your body's physical ability to heal itself. And there's research that shows that is generally the case. And so,
Mhm.
but I just discovered this accidentally bumbling around, trying to find myself. And that was a life raft for me. And then the other life raft that was really key in helping me rediscover myself was writing this first book and reliving that 10 months of treatment all over again. And this time, taking the time, and I wasn't as sick, to really experience the emotions and the rawness and reliving it. It was really, I never did go see a therapist, believe it or not, even though I'm such an advocate for that. But writing this book was my own therapy.
Well, and going back, like when you're going through it, it's really about survival, and you're in survival mode, and yeah, you're having the emotions, but you're not really thinking about all of that. You're just like, okay, how do I get through the next treatment? How do I live through this?
Yes,
How do I keep going? So
exactly.
being able to go back and relive it, I would imagine that would be very, very therapeutic for you.
Yeah, and I wouldn't recommend it for everybody. I mean, I don't even, it was just something I wanted to do because, and the whole reason for the book, and there are lots of great books written, books about breast cancer, about cancer. Um, at the time in 2015, I was such a paranoid person. I wasn't even on social media yet. And so not even a lot of people knew I even was going through this. And so what I had done, because I'm this journalism and PR major, is I had asked a bunch of friends within our inner circle, hey, I'll keep you updated via email because I'm a writer. would you like to be on my distribution list? And like 100 of them said yes, yes, yes. And so I did that. And the way that I would provide updates was, it's just my nature to not educate as the expert at any of this, but I would relate what I was experiencing to say what. Remember in about the same time, Angelina Jolie had a preventive, I think, double mastectomy and a hysterectomy, and I think she has the BRCA gene. Anyway, that was a big deal, and it was so great because she was talking openly about it, about her decision, her basis of her decision. And so then I said, okay, here's her deal, and there's different types of breast cancer. Here's what I have, which is the most common one, but it's really complex, people. And I'm not an expert, but just the fact that I was willing to share what I know and what I was learning was a big deal, and people appreciated that. So then, as I was continuing on and sending out email updates, several of those folks who were following me asked me, they said, would you please write all this? You should write a book about this. And I was like, okay, well, and then it was actually during that vertigo experience, I had this bizarre out of body experience. And I knew I had these guardian angels, and it was just my sort of spirit that was looking out for me. And it was that time during the vertigo, the worst part of vertigo, when I was so sick I couldn't even get off the bed. I thought I was going to fly off the bed. It was that bad. And I saw myself out of my body, kind of floating on the ceiling, and it was saying, you need to tell the world about this in a book. And holy smoke! So, um, fast forward then a couple of months, chemo still was not over. I was still, people were getting sick of, like, oh gosh, there she is again. She's going to talk about her cancer. All I did, I just talked about cancer all the time. And I went to lunch with a girlfriend, and she's like, Diane, you should start living your life as though you don't have cancer. And it was
Oh,
this,
whoa,
wow.
wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Eureka
Like,
moment. Cause I was,
say that again,
yeah.
because
Yeah.
that
So,
is so
I'll
powerful.
set this up, and we're at lunch, and I'm just like, talking about cancer. I'm so sick of cancer. All I do is talk about cancer. And ironically, I was just talking about cancer, and she put up her hand. She's like, stop. And she just said, you should live your life as though you don't even have cancer. And it finally shut me the hell up. I mean, I finally stopped, and I couldn't speak. It was so brilliant what she said. And so we were near the end of lunch, and so I was driving back to the office, and I was in my sports car that I used to drive. Then I worked at Centennial Airport, south of Denver, and I found myself in this car race with like a Porsche and a Lamborghini and a Lotus Esprit, and I was in my Mercedes AMG, and I didn't even realize it. And I looked around, and it's three middle-aged men and me, the one with breast cancer with a bandana on her head, racing each other. And I had this. It was like the arc of my story, and I just screamed out a big obscenity at the top of my lungs, and I said, basically, "F you, cancer! I'm still here." And I yelled that out, and that was the moment everything just like unleashed. And then this, my spirit angel, like, you got to write the book, got to write the book, got to write the book. And I thought, how blessed am I to be having this moment? And I don't know if the other drivers could tell that I had a bandana on my head. I don't know, or if that I was a woman. It didn't matter. It just was like, I fit in. Finally, I fit in, and look at me. I have breast cancer. And so all this paranoia that I don't fit in, and these anomalies that I'm always different and difficult, I'm like, I am supposed to be here. This is supposed to happen to me. And so that then became the moment I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. And it took me 3 years to finish this draft of this book, because I was working full time and I really wasn't well enough yet to take this on. But I just kept working at it. And there were a couple moments when, especially a writing coach that I had hired wasn't really thrilled with it, and I almost didn't do it. And it was the chancellor at the University of Denver who happened to read it, and she said, Diane, you do whatever you want, and it's nobody else's business. If this is important to you, you need to publish this book. And so I did. So again, there was so much wonderful support and people cheering me on, and then that just opened so many more doors for me. So that's why the bizarre title of The Unlikely Gift of Breast Cancer. And there's another story that I can tell, but I want to make sure that I answer your question. So it has to do with daddy daughter stuff. That's another unlikely gift.
Oh, yes, we will get into that. But I just want to do a disclaimer. You don't necessarily have to go out and drag race to have epiphanies about
I
cancer.
know. Who'd have thought? And we were just kind of taunting one another, but
Yeah.
we weren't really racing. It just happened. Four of these sports cars just happened to be cruising around at the same time, and we link up, and we're all in this, as I call it, a four ship of cars on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of summer. And it was a God moment. I mean,
Oh,
it really was. And so I that stuff gets me so excited because that stays with you for a lifetime. That was
absolutely.
supposed to
Those
happen.
memories,
Yeah.
that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
So I want to go back a little bit. So talk to me more now. You really worked with getting Cope up and going and actually getting therapists trained on working with cancer patients. What is the status of that now? First of all, it amazes me
Mm.
that there wasn't really training for that, because any of us who have gone through cancer just know the emotional and mental health toll that it takes. And in this age of, mental health awareness and all of that, that wasn't even a thing.
Yeah.
So tell me kind of where that went from you kind
Sure.
of getting started and where that is now. And like, are there people out there who are trained to work with cancer patients?
So, yeah, thank you for asking me to clarify. So, this type of training was available. And again, these are psychologists. There's all kinds of different types of, there's master's
Right.
level therapists, there's psychiatrists. So these are the clinical psychologists. This type of training, oncology psychology training, had been available, but only at the postdoc level. So, in
Gotcha.
other words, they would go back after they had their degrees and for follow on training. And so, COPE was at the time, what I was told, the first in the country, in this country, to offer this type of training while they're still in school. So, that was the differentiator. The other part of your question, the last time I checked, over 200, and these are graduate level students, over 200 students have taken at least one of the four COPE classes.
Okay.
and
Yay.
and 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 yes, and I keep in touch with those that are now fully licensed practicing clinical psychologists. Some of them work exclusively with cancer patients, and so um, I'm not enough of an expert to say what qualifies as seeing a psychologist versus someone at the master's level. But I'll just say that the DU has since expanded that, and they're offering behavioral health training now. So they've kind of expanded beyond cancer. But I actually know plenty of therapists at both the master's and at the doctorate level who it's just fascinating. This is their life calling, and some of them themselves are survivors. Some of them have had a close family or loved one that they've gone through this, and this is why they want to focus on this. But I in again, in the 9 years now, it'll be 10 years hopefully next year, that I went through mine, the whole mental health conversation has become much more embraced and a part of the concert of the conversation. I do
Hmm.
believe we have a ways to go yet when it comes to overall cancer treatment protocol and including mental health. And I've had several strong conversations with hospital administrators about why that's so challenging. And one of the reasons is the old it's just so difficult administratively to deal with all the insurance bill codes and all of that. There's that argument, and then it's just not part of the overall cancer treatment quote unquote model. But thirdly, and this
It
is
needs to
interesting,
change.
yeah, thirdly, this is the most interesting piece, was okay, so in my experience, and this is the daddy daughter, I'll just kind of tease about this. I had a past trauma that surfaced, and um, one particular hospital administrator I talked to was concerned that, okay, let's say I go into their facility for breast cancer care, and they offer mental health counseling. It could be in a group setting, it could be an individual, it just depends on your situation. And a scab gets ripped off of an old traumatic wound, and it all comes to the surface, not unlike PTSD, kind of heading down that path. Who then is responsible for exposing that or bringing that to the surface? It's a liability and an issue of, okay, well, you're here being treated for breast cancer, but now this has initiated this whole, you need to get some counseling, and who's going to pay for that? And that's the concern. And I understand that, but I'll just back up even further and go, we're just not paying nearly enough attention to mental health. Now that is changing, but we have such a shortage of mental health practitioners, which is where this whole thing started. I mentioned workforce development and training in the first place. Was I just didn't think we had enough of these um, types of professionals trained in the first place. And so, one dear friend of mine was starting out on her, I think it was 4 or 5 year PhD degree, and she wanted to work with in psychology. She wanted to work with cancer patients, but she wanted to work with clients sooner than 4 or 5 years. So she decided to pursue her master's degree in social work, and now she is specializing in psychology oncology. There's a lot of different words for this, but so that she could get out there and start to impact and help clients sooner. And
Yes.
yeah,
Wow.
and so many are, and again, insurance can complicate things. Is that gotten any easier? I don't know the answer to that, but
Probably not.
I was willing to. That's when I first approached my oncologist, and I made that nasty, quilt block statement. I said, I'm willing to pay for this out of pocket. I'm going off the deep end here. I am afraid that I'm going to have to just stop treatment, and I don't want to do that. But I am so freaked out here, and it ended up not being a lot of help. But what helped me was being part of the solution, and that's who I am as a person. I'm certainly an advocate trying to bring more attention to it, but unless you have solutions, I think you kind of get not heard. And so I learned that from business, is that you can complain about something and bring an issue to the surface, but unless you have a path forward, what good does that do?
And that's one of the things that I have loved since I've started doing this podcast is just the majority of nonprofit organizations, new
Oh,
products coming out, like things that people are doing now
yep,
are because of a need that was unmet when they were experiencing it.
correct.
And they figured out a solution to their own issue, which led to being able to help other people. And I mean, in the vast, I love that there are, over 200 people trained in this or have at least done one of the classes. But in the grand scheme of how many therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers in at least in the United States and in the world, that only 200 people are trained in this, like there's still sounds like there's a long way to go.
Yeah, and again, since then, other universities have started to offer this type of training. So, uh, it's growing. That training is available. It was kind of exclusive in the beginning, but a lot of other education institutions saw this deficit. Just call it that, and they're offering this similar kind of training specifically to oncology, psychology. Some of it's behavioral health, but again, just the fact that mental health is part of cancer treatment conversations is huge. I mean, it's so significant, and it should be. And so we
Absolutely.
yeah, we continue, and because I said my what I do believe it, I lived it, and my mental health stuff all came to the forefront. It was when I finally started paying attention to that I was taking my mind off of feeling so sorry for myself and anything but being nauseous all the time. And I thought, oh, if I was so fearful, I'd never feel good again. That was my biggest fear, and the driver of all my anxiety, because I just never felt good. I never felt good, and I hated that. It scared me to death.
I bet. Well, and one of the things like, so I dove into all things natural and how to change my life and how to, make my body and my mind an inhospitable host for cancer and mindfulness and practicing that stress management and mindfulness and meditation or whatever you look at as far as mindfulness is so important. Like having a strong, peaceful mind is so important for keeping cancer at bay. And then you have people who are drowning
Yeah.
going through all of this. And, I'm very fortunate. I had started seeing a grief counselor after my mother died.
Mm-hmm.
And I still was seeing her when I was diagnosed with cancer. So it was pretty much just like we dealt a lot with the grief of, all of that. But I think it's very underrepresented and under talked about
Mm-hmm.
the importance of mental health going through, because it is a trauma. Doesn't matter how easy it is or how sick you are, like it is a trauma, physical and mental and emotional.
Absolutely, it is. And no question, it was probably, yeah, it was the most traumatic thing I have ever been through in my 50, almost 9 years. But I've I categorized my cancer experience now as a trauma. And um, I do understand that I have friends, acquaintances that have been through it themselves, and we are never to talk about it. They have parked it in a place, and I respect that. I mean, that's
Yeah.
their business. That's the point, is that this is how I dealt with it. Um, and I don't wish this on anyone still. I mean, I don't mean to talk about it like this is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. It was awful. But I was, because of everything else going on in my life, um, I have just learned that this is actually very empowering, and I needed something like that because of my situation. Um, I just found myself, nobody ever um, gave me, and I never had an opportunity. My job was always to prop everybody else up, and this was really the first time uh, I was faced with something that I had control over, honestly. But I still had plenty of people that didn't know me well that would come and give me advice when I didn't ask for it. And
Mm.
that's much of what this next book, which is the sequel to the first book, it's about what happened to me after treatment ended. And again, this it's I've become a storyteller of the freakish, the funny. There's some funny parts, but also the aha and the growth moments. And so I do go back and reflect on when I was going through treatment and the number of I wrote them down. I'm a writer, and I had just needed to write all this stuff down. It was so amazing. People would tell me, I had a friend who had exactly what you're going through, and she ran 5 miles every day, and I was like, how? But again, I'm like, are you sure? um, but they thought they were helping me by telling me how their friends had quote unquote thrived through it, and it just didn't help. And so I was
It
not
never does.
I that was not an anger thing for me. It was a point to just go back and educate later that. And when people say, what should I say to someone who's been diagnosed with cancer? And I always say, first of all, be a listener. It's not about you. And maybe they do want to talk about it, maybe they don't. But just don't say anything. You don't know. You don't know. And just be there for them. And compassionate and gentle, but please don't start spewing out advice and how your friends or acquaintances thrived through it and what they should do and shouldn't do. Anyway, that was, I mean, I get angry about that now because it was
Mm.
incredible. And
I actually did a solo episode not too long ago
did you?
on
Bless
this
you.
very
Thank you.
topic.
Good.
My favorite was people who say, "Well, if I had cancer, this is what I would do."
Uh-huh.
It's like, okay, well, come back to me when you have cancer
I
and let me
know.
know if that's still the
I
case.
know. I know. And again, all of our experiences, those of us who go through it or are impacted. I mean, the caregivers can be experience trauma too.
Absolutely.
It's so unique based on so many factors, right? The state of
Mhm.
your physical health and mental health, your past traumas, how you deal with trauma. Um, all of that comes into play. I'm a problem solver, and so I was, gosh, speed reading through cancer books like I didn't know anything about cancer. So I was trying to get smart, and it was because I kept finding, particularly about breast cancer, all of these like pretty ribbons and beautiful women with makeup on that are bald, and it was just so superficial, right? And I'm like, tell me what it's going to feel like, and that was really what I set out to do, was to share what it felt like for me. I don't ever approach to say this is what it's like for everybody, because it's not. I just know, but this is what I experienced, and you can ask me anything you want. And I really do. Some people, it's too much. I'm too honest and raw that they don't care to read it. I get that. And then others, and one woman said, Diane shares the gory and the glorious. And
Oh, I love that.
yeah, it was really, so that's just who I am as a person. And um, I can babble on and on and on about any of this, but the point is that we are unique. Cancer is a unique experience. There's hundreds of different types of cancer. It's complex, like,
Mm.
um, and there's not one cure for cancer. That's always the other thing that I try to get in there, is that I wish if only it were that easy, and it's not.
Right.
It's not.
Well, before we run out of time, I want to quick, you alluded to the daddy daughter
Oh,
story. So
sure.
I just want to get to that
Yeah.
before we run
Thank
out
you.
of time.
So I'll be brief about that. My um, father married my mother, and my mother had 3 children from a previous marriage. That's important to the story because then he married my mother, then they had me. So I was the um, literally the redheaded little stepsister child. Anyway, he was my hero up until about the age of 5. I would only eat when I was on my father's lap when I was really little. I was daddy's little girl. And then he ended up going away to the psych ward of the Veterans Hospital in Lincoln, Nebraska for 6 months. And he had been a rural mail carrier. He got sprayed with DDT. The crop dusters sprayed him and he got poisoned. That was
Mm.
the cover story for why he went. But I'm pretty sure he came really close to committing suicide now. As it turns out, he was diagnosed with depression. That's what we called it back then. But it wasn't until I was writing my first book, and I had been, I guess, done with treatment for 2 or 3 years, and I was trying to finish my book, and I ran into one of my cousins at my niece's wedding, and I said, I'm really struggling with how to portray my father because he really was my hero. Then he wanted nothing to do with anybody. And she goes, let me talk to my dad. And so my cousin talked to her father, and he had been a counselor. And she emailed me back and she said, talk to my dad. He said, at the time we didn't call it this, but I believe now that your dad had what we now call PTSD, post traumatic stress, from the Korean War that was late onset, and that happened when I was 5. And this perfect storm of events. So my whole life, I thought I had been the reason for his depression, that I had come into this family and ruined it for everybody. I thought it was all my fault. And so by then I was probably 53 or 54. My father had been dead for 20, almost 20 years. And what a relief that was
Mm.
to get. And that was another unlikely gift that was a result of me having breast cancer. It had nothing to do with discovering this about my father. We don't know that's what it was. Likely everything aligns, but he had his own mental health issues, and what peace that brought me. And
Yeah.
so again, that's really the daddy daughter stuff, and I'm so much more at peace. And it's been so great to now continue to just peel back the layers and discover more about myself, and to stop blaming myself for so many things that weren't really my fault.
From such a horrible, horrible disease that you wouldn't wish on anybody. There's
Right.
so many, I hesitate to call them blessings, but so many silver linings and
Mhm.
things that can come from going through an experience like this. So I want to finish off. I always ask all of my guests. So, what is one piece of advice that you would give to someone that's just starting on a cancer journey? Not like, oh, I would do this or I would do that, or would that kind of advice. Just somebody who's listening to this who may be just starting on their journey. Like, what is one thing that you would tell them that would be helpful?
I would recommend to view this as a potentially life-changing experience. And that's aside from all of the unknowns and the scary parts, which is, I always say it's a test, but to really look at it as an opportunity to get to know yourself, because it can force you. I won't make that general statement. It can really force you to slow down and take stock of who you are as a human being, what matters, what you've accomplished, what's still yet to be done. And I'm not saying we're all missing things. I'm just saying it that I'm so glad I did that. I did take stock. I did um, analyze myself and say I expected that I would skate through cancer because I'm a problem solver. And sometimes your body just forces, and life just literally forces you to slow down. But that can be um, therapeutic, quite honestly, and transformational as it was for me. So, um, again, don't ever wish this on anyone, but like any trauma in your life, to really take a step back and to really analyze that. Ask a lot of questions. Tell people, hey, I want to be left alone, and that's okay. You know, really appreciate you helping me, but I just need some me time and some space. And I'll reach out when I'm ready to interact with people again.
Yeah, I love that. Yes. Some people want to be around people.
Yeah,
Some people want to be left alone.
correct.
And all of it is appropriate and right for you. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
Exactly. Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Diane. This was such a wonderful conversation and so important for, mental health, and to really be on top of your mental health as much as you can and get help when you need it. So I love that.
Thank you so much. Good to be on with you, and thank you so much.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your day.
I will.
Bye bye.